Saro Wiwa, writer and activist in Nigeria, executed in 1995 after standing up against oil companies, pushing for equal rights for the people in the Niger Delta. Now, almost 20 years later, Saro Wiwa's family and the Ogoni speak out.
It's amazing how he's put Ogoni land on the map.
He made the invisible visible. I never imagined this, and I never imagined that even 20 years later the thing would still be so painful as if it happened yesterday.
The older I get, the more I really appreciate my father's bravery. You know, you're aware of these things at 19.
It's almost like yesterday, first of all. That's each time Ken Saro Wiwa's name is mentioned, or there's a reference to the Ogoni, you know, people, their new leadership, etc. I just have the image of Ken before me.
Bane, a village in the heart of Nigeria's Niger Delta. This house has the grave of writer and activist Saro Wiwa, who was executed by the Nigerian military government in 1995. A mile away, there is still his house, next to the one of his mother. Saro Wiwa was born in 1941 in nearby Bori as the son of Chief Jim Wiwa and his wife, Jessie. We are in Ogoniland, in the Niger Delta. With its 650 square kilometers, it is the size of Greater London. Here live the Ogoni, a minority of 500,000 people marginalized by the ruling ethnic groups in Nigeria, being the Yoruba, the Hausa Fulani, and the Igbo. Saro Wiwa comes from the Ogoni community. Their minority position made it easy for the government to start oil exploration through joint ventures with mainly Shell. When Ken was 17, he all of a sudden saw pipelines emerging, gas flares, and oil spills. This disturbance made him angry, and he started sending protest letters to newspapers. This ignited Ken's interest in writing, and he wanted to go and study English, but was halted by the Biafra War, which raged in the Niger Delta from 1967 until 1970. Then, using his wits, Saro Wiwa became an administrator for the local government, but got fired because of raising attention for the oil companies exploiting his Ogoni land. Then, to make his daily bread, he ended up in real estate in Port Harcourt.
He was forced into business, which is not something he had any natural appetite for. And it became a moderately successful businessman. And he could have been much more successful because he was close to all of the Nigeria's rulers and the elites at that time, and he could have used that as advantages, but for reasons best known to himself, he didn't.
The turnaround for Saro Wiwa came in the 1990s when, again, desperate for income, he started producing the sitcom Bassi and Company, using the experience he acquired from having produced radio plays earlier on. It was a parody on the corrupt Nigerian society and is still the best viewed television show in Nigeria ever.
You want to be a millionaire, behave like a millionaire, act like a millionaire, this will be yours.
Once he'd made a little bit of money, he now started writing, he took up the pen again, he started writing a column in newspapers, and things were beginning to pick up again.
In his new books, he criticized the corrupt government and his concern about minorities like the Ogoni. But despite the changing fortune, his son Ken says his father was unhappy.
He felt frustrated because, he wasn't published outside of Nigeria. He had to self-publish, and his ideas were not getting much traction. Even though 30 million people were watching Bassi and Company, and even though he was writing a column in the Sunday Times, in Punch, in Vanguard.
Bad luck shifted his trajectory indefinitely.
When he lost a manuscript of a novel that he had written, which he wanted to use to introduce to a wider audience outside, he was hoping it would be published outside of Nigeria, and then from there he could then probably sort of introducing his politics. He lost the novel. He just felt, okay, maybe he was not meant to be a writer. And then he now became an environmental activist, and he realized that what he'd been all this time was actually an environmental activist.
Almost like being reborn, Ken Saro Wiwa took on the oil industry because none of the millions of petrodollars flowed back into Ogoniland, with its lack of schools and hospitals. This had Ken co-founding MOSOP, the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people. And in 1990, they presented to the government their demands in the Ogoni Bill of Rights.
Do you know the meaning of MOSOP? MOSOP is the movement for the survival Ogoni people. Do you know the meaning of MOSOP? MOSOP is the movement for the survival Ogoni people. Do you know the meaning of MOSOP? MOSOP is the movement for the survival Ogoni people. Do you know the meaning of MOSOP? MOSOP is the movement for the survival Ogoni people.
Ken Saro Wiwa first had shown the Ogoni Bill of Rights to writer Wole Soyinka, who is the 1986 winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature. Ken Jr., then 14 years old, remembers he gladly joined, but wasn't aware that his father was going to present the Ogoni Bill of Rights.
My father never wasted an opportunity to start talking about the Ogoni issue. So there I was saying, here he is talking about this thing again. And I just said, look, I wanted him to finish his business. Let me talk to my father's hero.
Well, I remember when I was around, I think maybe 12 or 13, he showed us this book, and it was called the Ogoni Bill of Rights. And obviously at that age, it meant nothing to me. It was just a very boring political document, but he was really passionate about it.
Oh, they'd done their homework, and they'd also done their plan for the future of the Ogoni people. It wasn't a kind of declaration which was long on ideology. No, it was a kind of ethnic view at an uncomfortable association, but based on the principles of justice and also on the unequal distribution of resources of the nation, especially oil.
Ken Saro Wiwa started to sacrifice more and more time for the Ogoni issue. His children noticed it began to overtake him.
Whenever we went down to the village to see our grandparents, on the way to the village, he would point out all the gas flares and the environmental degradation. And again, we would look and nod and, not think very much of it. But, he was really fired up about this, very angry about it. And so that's when, things started to change, and you'd hear him on the phone talking to friends and colleagues, and was constantly talking about oil and pollution and government corruption.
In my late teens, I was very aware that he had become obsessed by this issue. He didn't talk about anything else. People would come to the house, and that's what they would be talking about.
When the government didn't respond to the Ogoni Bill of Rights, MOSOP summoned the oil companies to pay royalties to the Ogoni or otherwise leave. When again there was no response, MOSOP called for a mass demonstration And on January 4th in 1993, 300,000 Ogoni took to the streets.
That day, what my father had achieved in 2-3 years is that he'd managed to get everybody, the community, the collective had found their voice and their identity and their pride back. And he always said that that was his greatest achievement. And he wrote that if he died that day, he would have died a happy man.
As a result of the protest, the unthinkable happened. A giant-like shell discontinued its million-dollar operation in Ogoniland. Ken Saro Wiwa was arrested for having caused civil unrest, but was released after 1 month. Then, in 1994 in Ogoniland, a group of elders was murdered by unknown assailants, and Ken Saro Wiwa was arrested again and brought before a military tribunal. And then Nigerian dictator Sani Abacha ordered his execution, which at the time was usual against anyone standing up against the state. This took place in the Port Harcourt prison on the 10th of November 1995. Only 2.5 years after the Great Demonstration of 1993. Alfred Ilere is a member of Mossop. At the time of Ken's execution, he was in the same Port Harcourt prison for having campaigned against the government. Alfred, from his cell, could hear the statement Ken Saro Wiwa made before he was brought to the gallows.
He said, what sort of country is this that delights in the killing of its illustrious citizens? What have I done to deserve death? Other that I spoke the truth and speaking for the rights of my people. If it be that by my death, my people can be free, Lord, allow me to die. Take my soul, but the struggle continues.
The execution of Ken Saro Wiwa was condemned by the national and the international community. By then, he was already internationally famous because of Shell's pullout of Ogoniland and his courage to stand up against the military rulers.
I said yesterday that I thought this was a fraudulent trial, a bad verdict, an unjust sentence, and it has now been followed by judicial murder.
I think in Africa are full of disgust at what has happened. And it is not only horrifying, but utter disrespect for all of us who have tried to assist Nigeria to come out of this situation.